Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Paul. I am the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing and the host of the Steel Strong Roundtable, which is brought to you a collaboration between the Congressional Steel Caucus, the Alliance for American Manufacturing, United Steelworkers, American Iron and Steel Institute, Steel Manufacturers of America, and the great men and women who make steel around this country. Just a word about the format. We'll have some opening statements from the members of Congress who have joined us. They've been very gracious with their schedule on this incredibly busy day. We'll then turn it over to our panelists for some introductory remarks that they will have. We'll kick it back over to the members of Congress for questions of the panelists. If you are a member of the media and you wish to ask a panelist a question, you can get in touch with Lisa Harrison at the American Iron and Steel Institute, Elizabeth Brotherton Bunch at the Alliance for American Manufacturing, or simply direct it to the company or to the member who you're seeking for a comment, and we'll be able to help you out there. So it's my honor right now to introduce the co-chairs of the Steel Caucus who have joined us, and as well as the vice chairs. So let me turn it over very quickly to Congressman Conor Lamb, Democrat from Pennsylvania, followed by comments from the other members of Congress. Congressman Lamb, over to you.
Hey, thank you, and appreciate everybody pulling this together. It's really good to see all of you. We are, as I'm sure a lot of you know, kind of in the 11th hour of a potential vote on infrastructure, which I think could mean great things for many of your businesses. So if anybody is in a position to advocate to my own leadership that we hold a vote on this thing one way or another, we would certainly appreciate that. And I think it's a decisive time. I also am looking forward to the discussion of 232 and where we are and where we need to go, particularly with respect to any import surges and trying to prevent those. And then finally, I just wanted to acknowledge a colleague who may not be on, I don't think he'll be on this call, but Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio. And I have been working on a program to develop some low carbon steel manufacturing research at the Department of Energy, which I think could be useful to everybody. I know this is an issue you take seriously, but it is much, much more easily said than done. So we hope to be able to help multiple ways there. And with that, we can move on to my co-chair, Frank, or whoever you want to get to next, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And Congressman Mrvan, over to you. Yeah.
I also would like to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank the participants and the leaders of the organization and for organizing this event to highlight the incredible work of the American steel industry. I want to thank you to the American Iron and Steel Institute, the Steel Manufacturers Association, the Alliance, and the American Manufacturing, and also my friend Tom Conway from the United Steelworkers and representatives from Cleveland Cliffs and U.S. Steel who are also from my district. As some of you know, my grandfather worked in the steel industry in Northwest Indiana. He came over from Czechoslovakia, and steel is a part of our fabric of Northwest Indiana and all the communities throughout our nation. I appreciate how much all of us and all of you as partners in our communities, we look out for one another because we know that when steel thrives, when workers thrive, when our region and economy thrives, we all succeed. And I appreciate your engagement with supporting our communities in times of need, like how U.S. Steel has given financial resources to Methodist Hospital Foundation earlier this year to support our frontline healthcare workers and all the contributions that Cleveland Cliffs have made, and also the impact that the USW has made in my region. It's also important that we recognize that part of our community is also to strengthen our environment. So I also want to say to U.S. Steel and to all the industry partners how important it is to be vigilant, to take every precaution necessary to protect our environment so that everyone in our communities can thrive. I appreciate your engagement and cooperation with our state and local and federal regulators. And I want us to continue to work together to ensure we are leaving our natural resources and environmental wonders preserved and protected for generations to come. And also, there are a few moving pieces these days in Congress. I want to just interject what Conor Lamb said. We're in the 11th hour of the infrastructure bill. I've talked about it for 2 years. People have talked about it for years and how transformational it will be for our country, for the industry, but for the American worker and the American steel worker. It's something that I'm not motivated by, I'm inspired by, And I want to be able to make change, because when I work with the steelworkers, when I'm at the barbecues, when I'm at the chili cook-offs, wherever I'm at, they talk about how important that is over the next 10 years. And a lot of generations are looking forward to that. So it's important to the businesses, but it's important to the people that work in my communities. And so this infrastructure deal that we're working on is extremely important. And also when we talk about Section 232, we know when the administration put that in place, it wasn't going to be in place for eternity. And we have to understand the markets. We have to be able to have strong trade policies that absolutely protect us against bad actors and subsidized steel. And so as we go forward, I want to do this in a partnership. I want to do this as we are today in a collaborative effort, making sure that we're making change in policy that advocates for the steelworkers, advocates for the steel industry and American manufacturing, and all that are included in this call, so that we can make an impact and have 10 years of workers, industry, manufacturing thriving, and my economy and the people in my district being able to put food on their table, send their kids to college, afford healthcare, and have a good pension. So I appreciate all of us coming together, and I thank you for this opportunity more than you know.
Congressman, thank you. I appreciate your leadership on all of that. It was good to join you in the shadows of Burns Harbor just last month to try to get this infrastructure bill over the finish line at the kickoff of the Steelworkers bus tour to do just that. And now we'll turn to Congressman Mike Bost of Illinois. And I was honored to join Congressman Bost. It's been many years now, 5 or 6 years, for a stand up for steel jobs rally in the town square of Granite City. Very memorable event. Congressman, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. And thank you for having me and allowing us on today. You know, these are very difficult times for many people all across the nation. And the steel industry and its workers are no exception. You know, the steel industry is vitally important to my Southern Illinois district. Many of you know that Alton Steel and many other steel mills are right there in my district and are part of the nation's industry as a whole, steel industry as a whole. But your industry provides tens of thousands of good paying jobs, manufacturing and materials that would build America. Earlier this year, the Steel Caucus, as both Conor and Frank mentioned, we talked to the Biden administration in a joint with the whole Steel Caucus to encourage the continued use of 232 tariff. You know, I was pleased that the administration had agreed to continue the tariffs. You know, but we can't let that go by itself. You know, China, we can't give China in any new avenues through Europe. You know, the tariffs play a critical role in leveling the playing field for the American steelworkers and companies. Earlier this year, with our leadership in the House, and it was able to include additional funding for an additional office of anti-dumping, countervailing and duties investigations. You know, countries like China will continue, and we all know this, will continue to try to find new ways to evade dumping tariffs and add global excess supply to our steel. Any deal with European Union must maintain strong guard post against China's ability to use the EU for their own gain. Now's not the time to decrease the growth of the American steel industry. This is the cleanest steel in the world. It's the strongest steel in the world. It's the steel that we can trust. And we have to be able to grow our own production. You know, I've learned from the steel companies in my district that the industry is certainly hurting during this critical time. You know, when American taxpayer dollars are being spent, we must prioritize the spending on products manufactured by American workers using American materials. This will not only help the American steel industry, but it will also help the workers in related industries who struggle with the COVID-19 shutdowns to get back on their feet. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here, and we'll just open it up to your panel.
Congressman Bost, appreciate your leadership and your comments there. Thank you so much. I'll now turn to our panelists, and we'll start with Tom Conway. Tom is the international president of the United Steelworkers, North America's largest industrial union. He comes out of steel and out of Burns Harbor and is deeply acquainted with these issues and has been an incredibly forceful leader on trade policy and on infrastructure and other issues that matter to his members. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. Look, we're here today on the cusp of the EU discussions with USTR and Department of Commerce and what we think about 232. And so I think that's crucial to this industry. And frankly, it's important for us to remember that this is a decades-old problem. And the 232 has been helpful. And it has sort of helped to reset how we think about steel and how we think about the domestic industry. And we can't afford to let that sort of slide back and look at a base period that's just pre-pandemic or something like that. If we're going to find some solution going forward, this industry now is running the way it ought to run at about an 85% capacity. And so when we're thinking about the American steel industry, that's the way we should run. And we should do reviews periodically to make sure that as capacity comes into the US, the 85% is adjusted. And if there's a flywheel then for imports, it's on top of that. There's a delta in between our capacity and our domestic consumption that can easily be spread amongst other market economies and allies. And so we've got to be careful, even as they consider Europe. You know, we have problems coming out of China, we have problems coming out of Russia, but there are problems within Europe as well. There are other countries who have been not particularly great actors. So as we think about this, we've got to stick now to a long-term fix for the US steel industry and for its economy. We can't just say, oh, well, prices are high, inflation, getting a panic over it. You know, once in a decade, this industry makes money and they plow a lot back into it, and it's very capital intensive. So every 10 years, making a bunch of money and putting it back in isn't really much of a business plan when you think about it. And we have an opportunity now to reset things and keep them right. And we can't afford to let it slide away over noises over 232. So we have to move very cautiously and very carefully. And I think we have the industry on a fairly solid footing, and we need to keep it that way. So thanks very much.
Tom, thank you. We will hear next from Mark Millett. Mark is the chairman, CEO, and president of Steel Dynamics, and he is also the chairman of the Steel Manufacturers of America. Mark, thanks for joining us. And you're still on mute. Thank you.
Well, we're probably the youngest steel organization on the call, if not in the States. We're only 25 years old, co-founded with a couple of other folks, but we've grown from the three of us to over 10,000 people now. And if you include their partners, their spouses, their kids, there are about 24,000 people that are reliant on our decision making and our success each and every day. And it's a pretty humbling responsibility, I think. But I guess just generally, in all honesty, Tom just summed it up already. But our industry continues to be pressured by significant global overcapacity driven by China, export economies, and we can't forget EU is a culprit there too, a big issue. There's no doubt in my mind that the existing trade provisions structured to suppress unfairly traded goods. Again, we don't want protectionism. We just want a level playing field. And in that environment, we will compete with anyone in the world. But they have improved the long-term viability of the domestic steel industry. There's been so many periods of time when our industry, certain portions of our industry haven't been able to earn their cost of capital. And as Tom said, that's no way to run a business. And I think it's important to recognize that if you look at China, about 85% of its capacity today is less than 15 years old. 15 years old. If you go up to Gary Works, you go to Bethlehem Steel, you know that a lot of our steel assets is a lot older. We need to be competitive, state-of-the-art facilities to compete on a global basis. And I think that the positive trade policies, not just the 232, but Section 201 that came around in 15 and 16, and the strong enforcement of those policies, of those trade laws, have certainly helped our industry, certainly helped SDI make major capital investments in state-of-the-art steel production technology. And it's technology that is far superior than the rest of the world from a sustainability and from a global gas carbon emissions perspective. Most notable, we've got a $1.9 billion steel mill being built. We announced it in November 18, just 6 months after the 232 tariffs. Fortunately, that's going to be starting up by the end of the year. And we just recently announced another $500 million of investment on some coating lines that will start construction next year. These are high-paying, very, very high-paying jobs. Just Sinton alone would be 650 jobs and probably 1,000 indirect jobs. And so the positive climate is creating growth in assets, growth in technology, and growth in jobs. I think it's critical that we sustain the transformation. I mean, our industry has lost capacity, it lost jobs over the last 20 years. We have done our jobs. We have rationalized the industry. We've invested both on the electric arc furnace mini mill side of the business and on the integrated business. It used to be 4 man-hours per ton to make a ton of hot band on an integrated basis, and it's probably 1.5 to 2 hours per ton today. Our industry has performed, and all we can ask is hey, help us create that level playing field going forward. I think the negotiations with the EU, there are just several points I'd just like to highlight. We got to insist that the EU is also committed against fighting China. And it's not just a back door to allow Chinese and export economy steel coming into our country. They have 30 million tons of excess capacity themselves. Secondly, even as the United States is sought closer cooperation with the EU, they themselves have government intervention on reducing imports into their countries. And I think we also need to consider that there's massive subsidies being invoked today to help their industries decarbonize. Spain gave ArcelorMittal 1.2 billion euros. Belgium just gave them 1.1 billion euros. Canada is giving Algoma 400 million to help decarbonize. That's a massive subsidy that we need to contemplate, because I'm doubtful that the US is going to see that sort of subsidy to help our industry. And I think, in honesty, it's just it's a matter of creating that level playing field. There's going to be continued global overcapacity. We're the target market. We need trade constraints. It doesn't have to be the 232 as it is today, but certainly some form of constraint going forward. So I welcome any questions after this. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. As he mentioned, there have been more than $16 billion in new investments announced by the steel industry over the last couple of years, capital investments to make the industry more efficient, more effective, to add domestic capacity and to upgrade. One of the companies that have been doing that is Cleveland-Cliffs, and we're honored now to be joined by its president, CEO, and chairman, Lorenzo Gonzalez. Lorenzo, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Scott. Pleasure to be here with you all, particularly with my good friend, Frank Mrvan, Congressman Conor Lamb, Congressman Mike Bost. It's a pleasure to be with you here, and my dear friend Tom Conway as well, and my colleagues from the industry. I carry the oldest zip codes among all steel assets under the Cleveland-Cliffs banner, but just old zip code. The industry in itself is pretty modern. Just for facts, we have 25,000 plus employees with Cleveland-Cliffs, approximately 20,000 represented by union. USW, vast majority, UAW, machinists. So we carry, among our 25,000 good jobs, we carry 20,000 middle-class, good-paying union jobs. And this is the backbone of our industry. It's our people. And you're hiring. We have been hiring since we acquired AK Steel and then acquired ArcelorMittal USA. So we continue to grow in terms of a number of people, and that's the way it should be. We are making money and we are reinvesting money. And by the way, this industry has been reinvesting money in the industry. You take, for example, a plant like Rockport. Rockport's from the same vintage as Crawfordsville, Hickman, Nucor, or all the plants in Steel Dynamics, the initial plants from the 90s. Same thing with Cleveland-Cliffs Stack and Coat. And you have the most modern galvanizing lines and pickling line ton and cold mill in Dearborn from 2011. So this industry has been invested. But Section 232 gave us the ability to invest massive amounts of money. I put $1 billion in Toledo, Ohio, to put our most modern direct reduction plant in the country, and one of the most modern in the world, already hydrogen ready once hydrogen is available, running on natural gas and reducing our own pellets from North Shore, which, by the way, we had to invest another $100 million in our North Shore mine in order to produce the DR-grade pellets for this plant, pellets that we also sell to other companies outside of Cleveland-Cliffs. So we have been investing, we continue to invest, and this is an industry that depends on investment. The difference between the American steel industry and others, particularly the European Union and the Canadians, is that we use our own money, we use our own capital, and they use money from the government. The things that Mark Millett lined up, they're massive. We are talking of billions of investment from different European countries in one company. We are talking about the Canadian government supporting all the three steel makers in their country. So we are competing, we continue to compete against countries. And we keep talking China, 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 and China is the biggest culprit, and China is the enemy. I have no doubt about that. I have been saying and calling China the enemy since 2016. But right now, I don't call China alone. I believe that the friends are a lot worse than the enemies. And the European Union is a big problem. Canada is a big problem, and Mexico is a big problem. And on top of that, we also have South Korea. So long story short, I don't feel that we have any business, Congressman Mrvan, Congressman Lamb, Congressman Bost, to allow our negotiator, particularly Secretary Raimondo and Ambassador Tai, to go into these negotiations in a position of weakness. We are in a position of strength. We have a vibrant steel industry. We support manufacturing in America. We support good paying middle-class jobs, vast majority union jobs, and we don't need subsidies. We only need to keep the level playing field. If we're going to go away with Section 232, we absolutely need something as strong as, because the problem is not going away. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to clarify any points we need to clarify later.
Lorenzo, thank you very much for those comments. We will next hear from Richard Fruhoff. He is the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Sustainability at United States Steel Corporation. Rich, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of the 23,000 men and women of U.S. Steel, it's an honor to be able to join you today. You know, from our iron ore mines in Minnesota to our steelmaking operations in Gary, Indiana, to the Mon Valley Works here outside of Pittsburgh, to our Granite City Works in Illinois, and to our electric arc furnaces in Fairfield, Alabama, and now Osceola, Arkansas. We are proud to mine, melt, and make steel in the United States. You know, I appeared before the Steel Caucus back in March of 2020, before all the COVID lockdowns went into effect. And what has changed? A lot has changed in the last 18 months. We started 2021 by completing the acquisition of Big River Steel. It's the most advanced state-of-the-art sustainable EAF facility in the United States. We also announced this month an exploratory site selection process for a new 3 million ton, approximately $3 billion mini mill. And here in southwestern Pennsylvania, we are actively exploring partnerships that can advance the region as a hydrogen decarbonization hub and be a national and international leader in the transition to a clean economy. In May, we publicly announced a 2050 net zero carbon emissions goal, becoming the first American headquartered steel company to do that. This is a significant step for a carbon intensive industry like steel. But as others have said, there's a race on, and we shouldn't fool ourselves. There's a global race on to decarbonize steel. And developing and deploying those technologies needed to decarbonize requires collaboration, but it's a matter of competitiveness. Canada and Europe governments are quickly stepping up to support and fund the multi-billion-dollar transition needed to achieve steel decarbonization. In the US, as others have said, we already are ahead. The American industry has the lowest CO2 emissions per ton of steel produced among the 7 largest producing countries. But we have to accelerate. There's a race on for global competitiveness, and we're going to fall behind if we don't step it up. We've got to get to that place where the other countries are going to get to 100% carbon green steelmaking. What else has changed? When we spoke in 2020, in March 2020, we talked about the need for infrastructure and for a strong domestic manufacturing base. Well, COVID has shown us what happens if you don't pay attention to your domestic industry and your infrastructure and your manufacturing base. So hopefully now everyone understands and agrees that we need to have a strong manufacturing base, and steel is the foundation of that. Global steel overcapacity and the actions of foreign governments and producers that feed that overcapacity are a real threat to our nation's economy, to our economic security, and to our national security. Our industry is investing to grow stronger, to create jobs, and to continue to meet our nation's needs. And it's critical that this is not undermined. I'll just finish by saying the 232 is working. It's supporting the reinvestment and the modernization of our steel industry. And there's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I want to thank each of you for the Steel Caucus chairs and co-chairs. We appreciate your advocacy and your leadership in Congress, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Rich, thank you very much. We will next hear from Greg Murphy. Greg is a Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Nucor Corporation. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to all of my colleagues and representatives who are on the call with me. I'm very excited to join you today and represent Nucor's more than 27,000 teammates and discuss how Section 232 tariffs, combined with strong trade enforcement, has been very effective in keeping unfairly traded imports out of the U.S. market. These moves have undeniably resulted in a healthier domestic steel industry, as you've heard from several of our colleagues. Lower imports have also spurred much needed investment across the industry. By year end, Nucor alone will have invested more than $6 billion over a 4-year cycle to upgrade our existing facilities and to build new ones. This includes a new greenfield steel plate mill in Kentucky, which will serve the growing markets needed for a renewable future, such as offshore wind. And last week, we announced plans to build a 3 million ton sheet mill to serve our critical customer bases in the Midwest and Northeastern United States. This $2.7 billion project is the largest single investment in Nucor's company history and will continue the manufacturing renaissance in America, created and giving rise to hundreds of high-paying, highly skilled steelmaking jobs. These capital investments and nearly all the new investments in the domestic steel industry have been directed to electric arc furnace production, the most efficient and sustainable steelmaking process available in the world today. Steel produced in the United States generates a small fraction of the emissions of steel produced and imported from other major steel producing regions, including those in the EU and in Asia. Nucor and the industry's investments will enable us to actually reduce the global carbon footprint even further. By lowering imports, Section 232 measures have actually effectively reduced the carbon footprint in the U.S. and supported lower greenhouse gas intensity steels produced right here at home. The bottom line is that Section 232 remedies are actually doing exactly what they were intended to do. They limit imports, they increase domestic steel production capabilities, and they ensure our national security. Weakening the 232 response now could result in a surge of unfairly traded imports, undoing the progress that has been made to shore up the U.S. supply chains. As was mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, we learned how vulnerable our national security is when we rely on foreign producers for critical medical supplies. Let's please not take that risk with steel. Thank you very much.
Greg, thank you. And our final panelist is Billy Milligan. He is a Senior Vice President at Commercial Metals Corporation. Billy?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Scott. Thank you to the caucus leadership for hosting this roundtable discussion today and for your continued support of the steel industry. I am honored to proudly represent the 11,000 women and men of CMC that produce the steel that builds America's critical infrastructure every day. Prior to the implementation of the Section 232, we all know that steel imports were at unprecedented high levels, which were not sustainable long-term for the health of the industry. These trade actions were a necessary, comprehensive approach that enabled U.S. producers to compete on a level playing field with companies that are state-owned, state-supported, or heavily subsidized, as my colleagues have called out. This trade action has helped set the industry back on a solid foundation, not only to supply the steel necessary for our national security, but also the economic security of our local economies and communities of which we live and we operate. Since the 232 implementation, CMC has invested over $750 million in almost 1 million tons of steelmaking capacity at 2 locations, one in Oklahoma and the most recent in Mesa, Arizona. These facilities have created over 400 direct middle-class, high-paying manufacturing jobs and an additional 1,100 indirect jobs, increasing the standard of living for these local communities. Both facilities use the innovative EAF micromill steelmaking technology, which is the most energy efficient and environmentally friendly steelmaking process available today. They consume 87% less energy and emit 66% less greenhouse gas than the global steelmaking average. These facilities contribute to the United States' global leading position in low greenhouse gas steel production. Without the actions of the Section 232, it may not have been feasible to invest in these facilities. So it is critical that this administration and Congress remain strong on trade policies that allow us to compete on a level playing field and to produce the steel that supports our national security and critical infrastructure here in the U.S. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to our discussions on these important matters.
Billy, thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. I'll now turn it back over to the members of Congress, Congressman Lamb, Congressman Mrvan, and Congressman Bost for their questions. And I would just ask if you have a question of a specific panelist that you just identify him for ease of the webinar. Thank you so much. Conor Lamb.
Hey, thank you. I'll just ask one question so that others can get in. Mr. Conway, if you're still on, I heard you talking about, sort of looking at the domestic capacity as a metric for what should be allowed in after that, marking it at 85%. And I was just curious if you have suggested that to the administration, and if we believe that that is a capacity that is easy enough to measure and respond to, that would actually be a framework they could pursue going forward if they wanted to.
Our position with the administration has been that, both to the USTR and Department of Commerce. And look, it's a simple calculation. I mean, if we're running at 100 million tons a year, we ought to be making 85 of it and look at it every year or so and adjust. And I think at that capacity, we understand, our unions understand, there's always been some percentage of imports that came in. And I think when the market fluctuates and it goes through its cycles, having a flywheel is not a bad idea. I don't want to see furnaces up and down and shut down, but that flywheel ought to be the imports, not the domestic producers and not steel workers who were on a job. So look, I think it's a simple solution. You figure out how you run it at 85% and you deal with the rest, whether you do that through a tariff-free quota or some other mechanism, and you then deal with your allies and your friends and in a market-based economy. So, you know, there'll be a lot of talk about this, but this is not that complicated to fix.
Thank you.
Thanks. Congressman Mrvan, any questions?
I'll defer to Congressman Bost right now, and then I'll come back.
And I think, you know, as I'm looking things over and trying to listen here and understand, and I know what we did with 232 and how it kicked things in, but one statement was made, and I don't remember whether it was Tom or Rich or who it was that made the statement, that that can't be the permanent fix. As we move forward, and how do we advise, or how do you advise the administration to make sure, because I know someone else mentioned, you know, China's not the only problem. It's how they slip it around to other countries, hide it out over here, change a particular item that makes them meet the tariff requirements, and bang, it's dropped back in to dump into our system. What is it that we can do, or you can do working with us, that we can advise the administration to keep them abreast, so that as we work on no matter what trade agreement we're working on, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's a multiple groups of countries that we're working together with, so that they know and understand that, and I think a majority of them do understand that many of these countries we're working with, it doesn't bother them to stretch the truth to benefit themselves. So how do we correct that and make sure that doesn't happen in the trade agreement moving forward?
Well, Congressman, I think you may have directed that to me, so I'll take a crack at that unless Tom wants to first. But I would say, you know, from my perspective, we should review the 232 as helping the U.S. steel industry, regardless of the source of the steel imports. This is about helping the U.S. steel industry to be competitive and strong in a matter of supporting our national security. It doesn't matter where the steel comes from. There's global overcapacity. There's overcapacity of 25 to 30 million tons in Europe alone. Where's that steel going to go? It's going to find the highest profit it can get from a market. We're the best steel market in the world right now. It's going to attract those that overcapacity from Europe at some point. Right now, you see the European steel prices dropping. Our prices remain pretty darn high, but at some point, it's going to attract imports from Europe. I think we need to look at the 232 as what is good for the United States steel industry, what is good for our national security, what is good for our economic security, regardless of where the steel comes from.
Look, if I can, I'd add, you know, the premise of the 232 and the idea that it was going to be temporary and something would happen, and tariffs aren't always a long-term solution. But the premise of the 232 to protect the country's national defense is a premise that ought to remain in place. That's not temporary. That doesn't fade away. And so there needs to be a long-term solution that recognizes that we're not going to sacrifice a core industry like our steel industry at the table of trade. So I think having that base loading that our government understands we're going to keep our own country base loaded and then deal with the balance is the right way to approach it rather than the other way around. And this has become a place where there's a lot of money, there's a lot of trade lawyers, there's a lot of people in the balance who make a lot of money off of this, who like an existing system where we're back in front of that forum day after day because someone changed a molecule of boron or something. It's a game we should no longer play, and we have an opportunity to fix it and get it right. And this is the time to do it.
And I think both of you mentioned the same fact that you know, 232 was not designed only for the steel industry. So how do we drag other people or other industries in that understand that they also might affect our national security, and that 232 is applied in a way through this administration, the next administration, the previous administration, to do what the 232 is supposed to do. And that is a case where we're not dependent on some other foreign government at a time when many of the governments we're dealing with are trying to to scrape and claw and cheat their way into a position where they don't take us over by force. They don't take us over by actually coming in and raiding our shores, but they are raiding the industries of our shores so that we are so dependent on them for whatever supplies we need. What other groups do you think we can reach out to besides, I know this is the Steel Roundtable, but we got to have allies in this.
Look, there are a lot of industries that are national defense industries that are important to us. And I think, frankly, I see this administration focused on that, talking about Buy American and all its spending and the infrastructure. Look, this infrastructure bill is important, but if anybody thinks within a 2 to 3 year period, the infrastructure spend is going to spring the steel industry out of this problem, it's going to take a while for those projects to get engineered, to get stand up and running. You know, initially there'll be some early rebar work, but
Right.
infrastructure alone is not the solution for this. That's a good long-term solution, and it's going to help the industry to help many other industries. But look, there's a lot of people who depend upon the U.S. and its national defense needs, and there's a lot of industries that are no different than steel in that regard.
Just to echo on that, you know, the infrastructure bill, even.
Hey, Mark, could I interrupt you for just 1 second? I'm sorry. Did you guys see in the chat Congressman Crawford was trying to get in? If somebody could make sure he's a panelist.
We did see that. I don't know how they're managing that, Scott. You?
He was in another meeting. I know he's trying to get in here.
He's
Thanks
trying
for
to,
letting us
he's
know.
trying to get on.
We have someone on that. We'll get them into the
We'll get him on.
thank you.
Mark, you were saying?
All right, yeah, the infrastructure bill, even though it seems colossal, the actual volume of tons that's going to generate, and to Tom's point, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to filter in over the next 18 months, 24 months. What we're talking about, what we want to ensure is there's no surge of imports. As has already been stated, you know, imports coming in at around about 20-22% of demand is tolerable. We can handle that. It's when you saw in the end of 2015 and in 16 when it goes up to 30 million tons. You know, that is the problem, and that's what we need to protect against. And the other thing, you know, we talk about sustainability and we talk about carbon footprint and global greenhouse gas. The American consumer, we all need to understand that the biggest impact the American consumer can have on global greenhouse gas reduction is Buy America. We are the cleanest industry in the world. And when the import comes in, when it comes in from China or comes in from a country that has no controls, that their emissions are perhaps, I don't know, 10 times or more of what we generate in this country, we're creating a problem, our own problem. So Buy America isn't just to support our industry. It actually supports the whole sort of sustainability carbon profile that everyone is so excited about today.
Scott, let me add something here. One thing that I'm very concerned about this decarbonization conversation right now is that we have been investing here. The steel companies in the United States, we are putting our own money, and we have been deploying capital toward decarbonization, our own capital. The Europeans and others, they are riding on subsidies. So of course, they will have a type of advantage, quote unquote, that's totally unfair. And that's how they hit our market. And it's all about jobs. It's all about what we have here. It's all about our ability to continue to support Buy America provision, because you can only buy America if you produce in America. So we have to have this in mind. These things don't come on boxes. It's all together. It's all correlated. So it's a concerted effort to make this industry weaker. We have been holding the line and we have been resisting, but we need to get not only Congress, and I know that you gentlemen know well what we're talking about, but we need the White House and we need the ones that are on the front lines not to be infected by sweet talk come from, particularly from the Europeans, but that's the next fight to fight. About we are doing everything, we're doing this, we're doing that. They're promising a lot of things that are not even technologically proven. And we are executing already. We are deploying capital. We have plants like mine already in operation. So we are defending national security. And that's what Section 232 has been doing. If we're going to replace with something, we need to negotiate from a position of strength, because we deserve to have our representatives on this conversation negotiating from a position of strength. In other words, I'm afraid that our negotiators will be playing with the Europeans and others that will come after the Europeans, believing that we're behind. We're not, we're ahead. And our carbon footprint is a lot better. We have numbers to prove. And when scope 3 becomes part of the conversation, which is coming, things will be even more flagrant. So this thing is not static, it's moving. We are in a position of strength. We know what we're doing. We are the best footprint. We're not bragging. We have numbers to prove. We need the government that's negotiating against the Europeans and the Koreans and others to know that with conviction and use that conviction to preserve the American position.
Lorenzo, thank you for that. For our audience, I'd like to note that Congressman Rick Crawford has joined us. I know that he had a committee obligation that came up well after this was scheduled. And so we're very grateful that you've been able to join the other co-chairs and vice chairs of the Steel Caucus here. And the floor is yours if you have some comments or wish to ask any of the panelists questions as well. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And my apologies for the tardiness. I won't make any opening statements, but I do have a question I'd like to direct to Mr. Murphy and Mr. Millett relating to Mississippi County in my district. It's actually a leader in steel EAF steel production. And while steel making is carbon intensive, the EAF process is far less carbon and energy intensive than traditional steel making. It's incredible that 70% of the steel in the U.S. is made through recycling compared to 27% globally and only 9% in China. And when I hear calls for the steel industry to decarbonize, it seems to me this is more of a global problem for China, the EU, and others to address. The U.S. industry has made the investments and is doing its part. Would you agree with that?
Congressman, let me start, and I'll let Mark pick up from there. Thank you for that great question, and absolutely agree that this is the path. And we agree that we've done our part to lead the American steel industry in being the most sustainable in the world. You know, as you're well aware, our investments in Arkansas alone have helped to make Arkansas the home to the largest EAF producing region in the entire country. And we built this company on a sustainable business model of recycling steel. And, you know, if you really consider today where we are, and you look at even the most aggressive target set by the Paris Agreement, the below 2 degree scenario, Nucor today is already at 0.47, and that below 2 degree scenario is 0.82. So we're already ahead of the most aggressive goals set for the steel industry under the Paris Agreement. So we are absolutely proud of our industry leading performance. And we're also proud of the steps that have been taken by others in the industry to advance the cause to make the U.S. the most sustainable steelmaking region in the world. You know, we're not going to rest on our laurels either, though. We believe that it's possible to make additional reductions in our greenhouse gas intensity. And we've announced further reductions, a 35% reduction in our scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gases. We're going through a transformational process in this country where the grid is becoming more renewable, but that alone is not going to do it. And so we're looking at every aspect of our energy consumption, every aspect of our operations, and every aspect of the raw materials that we consume in making steel. Globally, only about a quarter of the steel is produced by EAFs. And so, as we've been saying all along, the best way to really attack this problem globally is to buy steel made in America, by electric arc furnace producers, and we will be able to accept and get to that challenge that was set for us in the Paris Agreement.
So, Representative Crawford, appreciate your question, and I would echo Greg's thoughts. We're the leaders in the world. Our plant, our Columbus plant, for instance, is recognized by European automakers as having the lowest carbon footprint in the world. And so we, and it's not just us, as we've said earlier, just our steel industry in general is the cleanest in the world. And unfortunately, CO is the enemy of the day, so to speak. 8% of carbon CO emissions in the States is related to steel. We shouldn't be considered the enemy. Steel is a core component of our economy. You gotta have it. And as I said, we're the cleanest. And a fear as we evolve down the road beyond the immediate issue of the negotiation with the EU is carbon tax, or how you introduce that tax. And I heard just recently, keep names out of it, but someone suggested that, hey, let's put a carbon tax to pay for the infrastructure bill. Absolutely freaking ludicrous thought or idea. And so it's because you got to be careful and not be punitive. You've got an industry that has been proactive over the years, reinvesting in its technology, building new plants, and doing the right thing to become the cleanest industry. To come along and be punitive through a carbon tax it's crazy. You go to a border tax, a carbon border tax, so that you limit those high emitting tons coming into our country and supporting the U.S. industry itself. Those are the thoughts of sort of proactive, sort of innovative thinking that we need, as opposed to the old-fashioned punitive smack them with a baseball bat. Hey, our industry in total has been bellying up to the bar, investing and I think doing what we should have been doing responsibly, not because we're forced to do it. We haven't been forced to do these things over the last 25 years. We've been doing it on our own accord.
Thank you. I'll just leave you with one final question here. If it is true that China is the main culprit on global steel overcapacity, and if that's the case, should we be letting our allies like the EU off the hook?
I'd be happy to start. I mean, I think China clearly, just due to the sheer magnitude of the amount of steel they produce and the methods that they produce it, is obviously the poster child for these issues. But one of the things that I think we can't overlook is that a lot of the steel that's being melted and poured in places like China ends up in places like the EU, and then turns around and ends up on the shores of the United States of America. I think the other thing that I would also like to remind everybody of is that they're in a position of overcapacity in the EU to the tune of 25 to 30 million tons. The people on this phone call have taken the necessary steps and shown the necessary business discipline to run their companies responsibly, because we're responsible for raising our own capital and investing our own capital. And so if we have assets that are not performing, and we take the necessary steps to make sure that we are able to compete. We'll compete fairly with any company around the world, but it's very difficult to compete with countries. And so China is the huge problem, but China alone is not the problem. And I think we've got to be very, very careful and thoughtful about how we're going to deal with steel coming from other parts of the world and flowing through markets that are already oversupplied, like the EU.
Yeah, one quick addition to that. You got to be very careful in prescribing what the disease is, and then immediately going with a one-size-fits-all solution, just to make numbers part of our conversation. China produced more steel through the electric arc furnace route than the United States, tonnage-wise. Because China is so enormous that China, with 12%, 13% of their production via electric arc furnaces, produce 120 to 130 million tons of steel through the electric arc furnace route. So the solution is not just let's go everybody EAF. We're already in a position of equilibrium here in the United States. We're actually well beyond equilibrium. We have what we need to have. And the entire industry here in the United States has been behaving well. The problem is not who is doing what, and here who are the pick winners and losers. That's not the way it works. What we need to understand is that where the enemy is, the steel industry in the United States is responsible for 1% of carbon emissions. 1% of all CO2 emissions is from steel. Agriculture is 10%. Who's talking about agriculture? Who's tagging agriculture of being not compliant with the environment? So these things are being used against us, and we need to be careful not to divide here internally and then try to win outside. We have a common enemy, and the common enemy is outside, it's not inside. It's not China alone. The European Union is part of the problem. South Korea is part of the problem. Even our friends that I'm seeing here through the window here, Canada, to the north, they are part of the problem because of the subsidies, because of the unfair treatment of their industry, and then dumping here in this country, believing that we are part of their backyard. We're not.
Lorenzo, thank you for that. And Congressman Crawford, thank you for your questions and your leadership. I know we're almost at time. I would only note on the EU that the EU also has not been a reliable partner in challenging China, and in particular, some of its unfair trade practices. And so expecting a blank check should not be in the cards for their negotiators. Congressman Mrvan, you had deferred your questions, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask a question to the panelists, because we're almost at time here, but our audience is hanging on. I think they're eager for this conversation.
Well, I wanted to touch on 2 points. I wanted to ask President Conway one question. A while back, there was a communication that the USW put out about the EPI, the Economic Policy Institute, and their study about Section 232. If you can elaborate on that and why that's so important for that discovery.
Look, the EPI is just, for those of you listening in or watching, is an important economic think tank and advises a lot of people. And I think sometimes people think of them as more left or progressive, but their conclusion of how important the 232 is to our economy broadly, and that it's the right approach to take, is sort of inarguable. So, I've noticed a trend in the last few years that all the economists who thought globalization was going to be a great idea 15 years ago, it's kind of come home to roost that, it costs the country a lot of jobs. It costs a lot of middle-class people real harm in their lives. And the idea just didn't work. And so you really need to recast the way we think about it. There's a role for trade, and there has always been a role for trade in our nation, but not to just give up your jobs and give up your industries on the sort of altar of free trade. So I think we're in a role of rethinking that. I think the EPI report for the steel industry is important in pointing that out. And I think that's the role of Congress and the administration. And I think the administration gets it right now. And we're sort of moving in the right direction with Buy American, with melted and poured, with understanding rules of origin, and enforcing them. And I think we've recast that era of where we thought factories ought to sit on ships and float around the world for the best price. So.
And I just want to reiterate, I've testified twice in front of the International Trade Commission, and something that hits home with me that is real life is that a local tin mill in my district, when I was an elected official and not a member of Congress, I think about 124 members had lost their jobs because the tin market fell out from underneath it. And as we were going to the International Trade Commission, those individuals never got their jobs back. They didn't have health insurance. They didn't know where to turn. And when you're facing that, once it goes to the International Trade Commission, as we've talked about earlier, that's too late. And then they usually modify it. And then that is also too late. And real families have lost their jobs. Right. So I think that circles back to how important Section 232 is, how important it is to enforce our national trade policies to protect this industry. And as I opened up, you know, these are real families with real jobs. We've talked all about thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the backbone. We all agree upon that the steel industry needs to be protected, and Section 232 is extremely important. And I think today we focused on the fact that the EU and other bad actors who are over capacity, it's a matter of national security. And as we go through the pandemic, our fragile economy, no longer can we let that go by the wayside along with the national security issue. And we also expanded saying we need, as Representative Bost said, we need allies in this fight to protect it. And I agree with Tom Conway, who said very clearly, the globalization of our economy costs jobs. And as we go forward, we have to make sure that we're protecting those jobs. And I think as a Steel Caucus co-chairman in a bipartisan way, those are the measures that we're trying to achieve every single day.
Thank you, Congressman Mrvan. Before we close out, I just wanted to give Congressman Bost and Congressman Crawford an opportunity to say have a closing thought if they desire to do so.
Just a quick closing thought, if I can. First off, thanks for having this and everything like that. And I think there's been several things that have mentioned, Tom. I agree with you in the fact that the globalization, unfortunately, the reality of that, not only in this industry, but so many industries, is it is not the building up of other nations to try to be at our level. It's to try to drag us down quite often to their level, which doesn't gain us anything. So the reality is that we need to make sure we need to focus on this industry. Remember, I come from not only the steel fields, but the coal fields as well, where we create the cleanest coal burning power plants in the world. But yet we are involved in climate agreements around the world and everything like that. And every time we discuss, it's to put regulations on us that are not even with those regulations that are being put on other nations. Look, we are all for carbon reduction. We're all for making sure that we have a cleaner earth, and we are. But this idea of thinking that if all of a sudden we just strap a collar around the United States and drag them into the pit is going to straighten it out, we've got other countries that are laughing all the way to the bank. And so we need to make sure we keep these talks going, that we're on agreement, that we're fighting together, regardless of whether it's here in Congress or whether it is with each industry that's out there, to make it to where we bring everyone up, not tear us down so that we can be in the same place where other nations are. But that, hey, I appreciate this group as always, and thank you for having us here today.
I'll just echo those sentiments. I appreciate it. And again, I extend my apologies for my tardiness, and I appreciate your flexibility and your latitude, allowing me to offer a few questions. We look forward to working with y'all in the future.
Thank you. And we'd note that Congressman Lamb had to leave for another commitment, but Congressman Mrvan, Congressman Bost, Congressman Crawford, thank you so much for your leadership, the Congressional Steel Caucus, and for the men and women in the steel industry in the United States. I want to thank Tom, Rich, Mark, Billy, Greg, and Lorenzo for your thoughtful comments and responses to the members of Congress and to the sponsoring organizations, in addition to the Alliance for American Manufacturing, the American Iron and Steel Institute, the United Steelworkers, and the Steel Manufacturers of America for hosting the Steel Strong Roundtable, and for you, the audience, for tuning in. If you need follow-up, you can reach out to American Iron and Steel Institute, Alliance for American Manufacturing, or any of the congressional offices if you have specific questions. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.